Take your time. I know you're eating. It's cool.
It's running.
Okay, cool. Take your time. I'm
Hmm.
just posting this and then we'll get started. Great. So tonight we will be covering the early sections of the philosophy of nature. Now, we've already read the introduction and sort of seen how um, absolute, well, the absolute externalizes itself as nature. Uh, Basically, since the absolute covers both um, reality and thought as well as being, nature in its externality, especially self externality, shows up um, at, with the accent on being. So, the first part, and you all can see the screen, right? It's shared correctly?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so he's summarized the first section, mechanics, talking about mechanics. I just said two things that mean the same thing. So, mechanics treats of A, self externality in its complete abstraction, space and time. So, think about that. And this is the section we're going through at first, which is the complete abstraction of space and time. The second part of mechanics would be the self externality as individualized and its relation in that state of abstraction, i.e., matter and motion. And this has to do with finite mechanics. And the third, C, is matter in the freedom of its intrinsic notion in its free motion, absolute mechanics. And okay, he says self externality splits at once into two forms, positively as space and negatively as time. The first concrete thing, which is the unity and negation of these abstract moments, is matter. This is related to its moments, and these consequently are themselves related to each other, i.e., in motion. When this relation is not external, we have the absolute unity of matter and motion, self moving matter. Okay, his language here is familiar to readers of Hegel. If you're just coming to this just out of the blue, this is not going to make very much sense to you. But what he's basically saying is that the relation of space and time imminently, well, in other words, by its logic of necessity, is self moving matter. Space and time, properly sublated with each other, self moving matter. But of course, that's the end of mechanics. Um, we're not nearly there yet. So space and time. Um, I'll just read out 254 first. Space. The first or immediate determination of nature is space, the abstract universality of nature's self externality, self externality's mediationless indifference. It is a wholly ideal side by sideness because it is self externality, and it is absolutely continuous because this asunderedness, basically, this asunder means split apart or differentiated, right? Is still quite abstract and contains no specific difference within itself. So it's it's a it's a brand of difference that's so abstract that it's basically not, but at the same time is. So, um, let's see here. If you go down, he mentions that space is simply pure quantity only no longer as a logical determination, but as existing immediately and externally. Nature consequently does not begin with the qualitative, but with the quantitative, because its determination is not like being in logic, the abstractly first and immediate, but a being already essentially mediated within itself, an external and other being. And if you recall from the logic in the first book, the second movement is quantity. In this larger context, nature comes second to logic. So there's your number two. Um, so we've already read about this and sort of spoken about this. What thoughts do you have, Kyle, starting off?
I don't know, I guess the first thing that kind of brings to my mind is that we have a concept of space, but it's basically amorphous. It's sort of like vaguely wants to point in a direction, but there's no clear direction it should point, which is why the first negation makes perfect sense too.
Yeah, yeah. And he runs down Kant a little bit um, in the remark, and he starts talking. I really like this because he differentiates. Ooh, here's something I need to cover really quick. So, in the philosophy of nature, he gets pretty much right down to how this is going to work. He says our procedure for the whole book consists in first fixing the thought demanded by the necessity of the notion, basically any category, and then in asking how this thought appears in our ordinary ideas, right? So you connect the notion with an ordinary idea of the notion, right? So, you might come across a category like place, and he's saying, okay, let's look at the notion, and then let's look at the ordinary idea of place, and see how they correspond. The further requirement is that in intuition, space shall correspond to the thought of pure externality. Even if we were mistaken in this, it would not affect the truth of our thought. And then he says, in the empirical sciences, the reverse method is followed. There, the first thing is the empirical intuition of space, and only thereafter do we come to the thought of space. So, what he's saying there is in the empirical sciences, um, the thoughts about space are as many are as differentiated and many, I guess you could say, as grains of sand on the beach, or as many people thinking about space itself, because we all have different experiences, we all have different perspectives. And Hegel is saying basically that you need to use his method because then you're able to construct a more universal, if that makes any sense. Um, and then he says, and I love this, he says, the filling of space does not affect space itself. The heres are side by side and do not interfere with each other. The here is not yet place, but only the possibility of place. The heres are completely the same, and this abstract plurality without real interruption or limit is precisely externality. This discussion Two things. This discussion reminds me of something and other from logic, where you have a something and every other something is exactly the same as all the other somethings, right? Only here you have it in external reality, right? Um, and you know what? I'm gonna say I I'm gonna say it doesn't remind me of it, but um, I'd say the here of self externality is grounded in that general logical idea of a something and another that are completely the same, right? It's indifferent which one you pick. It's going to be another something. Does that make sense? The heres are also different, and this is where he gets into the differentiation. But the difference is equally no difference, i.e., it is an abstract difference. Space is therefore punctiformity, but it's a negative one, and so it's a perfect continuity. You look at any point, or you can go right past it, and you're still in space, right? Um, Above, below, right, and left, any spatial point. Um, Before we move on, I just want to point out to the audience, he uses the word here, and he defines what the here is within space. And for readers of the phenomenology, when you're starting to go through sense certainty, the only real experiences that someone has looking from the point of view of sense certainty is this here, this now, right? So remember that. Experientially, what am I going to say? Um, I'm kind of getting at this early, but it shows up early in the text. So in the phenomenology, this here now is a sense certainty of experience, and that's as specific as it gets. You know what I mean? But if you think about how the logic deletes the I from uh, uh, from being, so that you can just get to being in nature, uh, um, when you're looking at the experience of this here now, you basically do the same thing. You delete the person who is experiencing this here now, and you just look at here now, right? And that's why we look at space and time. Um, it's an insight uh, that shows up if you've read the phenomenology, but not so much if you haven't. I wonder how much he references uh, that or not. I'll have to see, but I'm not sure if he references it. Okay, enough of my gabbing about this. Okay, um, all right. Space as in itself, the notion as such, contains within itself the differences of the notion. Then there's A. In the indifference of space, these are immediately the three dimensions, which are merely diverse and possess no determination whatever. Um, uh, Jim, Kyle, can you talk to me a little bit about height, length, and breadth before but before we're even into anything determinate, which we're not yet. Um, they sort of fill out space, don't they?
right? The X, Y, and Z, because they're all
Hmm.
orthogonal to each other,
Yeah.
which is possible in three dimensions.
Well, I think he's saying that Hegel's saying that that's the minimum number of dimensions that you can have is three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he metaphysically proves that too later
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he rules out the possibility of more than three, but three is the absolute minimum.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I remember Hoolgate talking about that a little. But remember, when we're looking at the three dimensions of space here, there's actually no way to tell whether you're talking about whether something is height, length, or breadth. And so I like to think of it as the three dimensions sort
Yeah.
of on any axis you like. But it's so indifferent which one you're talking about at this point because nothing has been defined determinately at all, right? And so it's almost like an abstract, like it's like an empty signifier that hasn't actually been defined to be of any use, I guess you could say. But of course, that's not the point. No one is actually going to use undefined height, length, and breadth. That this is just how it sort of hangs together logically, if that makes sense. So, going on to 256, he says, B, the difference of space is, however, essentially a determinate qualitative difference. As such, it is A, first, the negation of space itself, right? Because this immediate differenceless self-externality, the point. Okay. But the negation is the negation of space. That is, it is itself spatial. The point is essentially this relation that is, as subletting itself, is the line. The first other being, i.e., spatial being of the point. And then gamma, he says, the truth of other being is, however, negation of the negation. The line consequently passes over into the plane, which, on the other hand, is a determinateness opposed to line and point, and so surface simply as such, but on the other hand is the sublated negation of space. It is thus the restoration of the spatial totality, which now contains the negative moment within itself, an enclosing surface which separates off a single whole. So he goes into the remark, and the remark basically says that this isn't like geometry. We're not dealing with point, line, plane, cube, and so on, like the math textbooks do. The line does not consist of points, nor the plane of lines follows from their notion. For the line is rather the point existing outside of itself, i.e., relating itself to space and sublating itself, and the plane, similarly, is the sublated line existing outside of itself. So he's going along the logical argument again. What do we think of this? Because in geometry, you work externally from, anything you can see. You grab a piece of paper and you draw a line, or you draw a point, and then you move the point and create a line. You move the line and create a plane. You move the plane, you create, and so it's a very intuitive process, right? And he's stressing that the dimensions that emerge from this process in space have to be logical ones, not ones fueled by presuppositions. The presuppositions I was talking about with geometry are basically, you look around you, you experience life, and you see these shapes, right? They're already existent. So, like Kant taking Aristotle's logic, you can do this with experience, but it doesn't mean that you've figured out how they're connected logically, if that makes sense.
I'm also kind of thinking like, they take the point and you extend the point out in one way, you get the line, you extend the line out.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it's come about externally, although you do get to the same point because the negation is actually proves why that direction is necessary.
Yeah. And I don't think Hegel has a problem with coming to the knowledge of spatiality in that way. It's just that he wants to provide the proof, the logical proof in thought, which is a little harder to envisage. He does his best to try to explain it in this section, but I'm still trying to work it through a little bit, if you know what I mean. This is interesting. He says, we may note in passing that it was a singular opinion of Kant's that the definition of the straight line as the shortest distance between 2 points is a synthetic proposition, since my concept of straight involves nothing of quantity, but only a quality. In this sense, every definition is a synthetic proposition. What is defined, the straight line, is at first only intuition or figurate conception. So picture thinking, right? The definition that is the shortest distance between two lines, points, first constitutes the notion. That the notion is not already given, and intuition is the difference between them, which makes the definition necessary. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. The definition is obviously analytic, since the straight line can be reduced to simplicity of direction, and simplicity with reference to manifoldness yields the determination of the least manifold, here the shortest distance. And he goes into this talking about the science of geometry, and how when you go about it, there are presupposed and derived determinations. Yeah. He talks about the triangle and the square. Um, and basically, yeah, how to come up with a definition of, say, a triangle that isn't very extra. And he talks about the geometrical one that takes two triangles to prove the triangle, whereas if you went the logical necessary route, you would only need three parts of the triangle, and the rest of it defines itself. You know what I mean? Um, yeah. The truth of the matter is this, that the proposition only requires one triangle, which is in itself such a relationship that when its first three parts are determined, the remaining three parts also are. The triangle is determined by two sides and one angle, or by two angles and one side, and so on. And the same thing happens with the square. Uh, you have rectangles that make up the square. And he shows how Pythagoras' theorem demonstrates the triangle in pretty much a purely proof form. And of course, reading this section, it made me want to pick up my copy of Euclid, but I wonder how much of it I would understand. Yeah, Dover, the publisher called Dover, I'm sure you both know it, publishes a copy of Euclid's geometry in 2 volumes. And as far as I know, it's complete. I don't know how uh, obvious it is to sit down and read it, or if you need a guide. I've never done it before. Have either of you?
No.
Okay. Yeah. But just going through this makes me realize that some of my education is missing. Any thoughts on?
Hobbes, I think said Thomas Hobbes says he didn't read Euclid until he was like 40 years old. When he read Euclid, he was struck by Euclid's methodology and saw Euclid's methodology as something that could be applied to philosophy.
Yeah, as Spinoza did as well.
Yeah.
Although um, I think Spinoza was casting about for more of a loose metaphor than something that was itself structuring. Like
Yeah.
Hegel, the way he writes, he's not only looking for a metaphor, but also something in itself that structures what he's writing. And I think that's a step forward in philosophy. But at the same time, as long as you have all the parts, as Spinoza did, self-generating matter and so forth, it's just a matter of finding a good method of exposition. Yeah. So that brings to a conclusion the discussion of space in that context. Space as abstract, recall. So there's not much to it, right? Space is a very abstract category. It's made up of 3 dimensions, which he calls, does he call it? I think he calls it height, length, and breadth. Although at this edge of abstraction, it's tough to tell. Yeah, he says it is not at all fixed whether direction is called height, length, and breadth, because what exactly are you measuring at this level of abstraction? There's nothing to measure yet. So we just know that they're there and they're sort of empty signifiers, but they clearly define the sort of the abstract difference that exists within space at this level of abstraction. And so we go into time, and he says, Kyle, if you could read 257.
Negativity as point relates itself to space, in which it develops determination as line and plane, but in the sphere of self-externality, negativity is equally for itself, and so are its determinations, but at the same time, they are posited in the sphere of self-externality. And negativity, in so doing, appears as indifferent to the inert side-by-sideness of space. Negativity thus posits for itself is time. Posited for itself.
Yeah. And so here you can see how within space, immanently, negativity is space relating to itself through line and plane. But parallel to this, negativity itself in self-externality apart from space, or the full negation of space itself is posited as time, since it's indifferent to space, and it's what makes it up, which isn't much yet, right? So time as a complete negation of space in this way, yeah,
Trying to visualize that. It's like pretty much that there's different, like space by itself is, just there. But then there's different aspects of connections of space outside of that that are the same space but connected different times. Is how I'm trying, how he's kind of, how it gets to it. I'm trying to make that connection though.
the connection is logical, Kyle. You
No, I know.
cannot. Yeah. Oh, when I say that, I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be glib here. What I'm saying is that you cannot picture it pictorially yet, and so
Right.
all you can do is say what is the negation of space external to space. Logically, it's time, and you can't really picture that. It's in the relationship
Well, he says, yeah, it
to
appears
space.
indifferent in the inert side by sideness of space. That's what I.
Exactly.
That's when it finally is at that. As it's kind of it's that thing that is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no picturing it, but if you try, you end up with something far more determinate. And that's been my problem. Like I always reference sci-fi and how space is far wider than those three dimensions, or time being what it is I don't know, more than what it is, I guess you could say, within the sci-fi context. And it's not always very helpful to do that, but I try to do it anyway, like pictorially, like try to picture it. How would this look? And it's usually described like in DS9 time, and we'll get to this, but time is described in DS9 as a single, like a singularity, in which now the future and the past are all one all at once experience, right? Whereas for us, how we define time is a lot different. Yeah.
I think I figured I was trying to get it from Holgate that it's just space negating itself. That's the part. So it's kind of the space negates itself, replaced by another space, etc. And so at that point, there is that connection there of another kind of flow, or kind of almost spatial, because time has a, as we'll see, has a more as a spatial concept to it. But
Yeah.
that's the part I was trying to remember, because
Yeah.
in my mind I still picture vague axes I know is abstract. So
Yeah. Yeah. And he says, now time is precisely the existence of this perpetual self sublation. In time, therefore, the point has actuality. So you have space and it's a complete abstraction, and there's point, but there's also what's past the point. And so the point is almost too abstract to be really determinate within space, because it could be anywhere, and it is everywhere, right? There's no way to differentiate it yet, because we haven't even talked about matter yet, which exists in space and within time, is actually the what did he say? It's the unity, the self-external unity, something like that. Yeah. Difference has stepped out of space. This means that it has ceased to be this indifference it is for itself in all its unrest, no longer paralyzed. Okay. In pictorial thought, space and time are taken to be quite separate. We have space and also time. Philosophy, basically what we're talking about here, fights against this also. It's not space and time, it's space-time, I guess you could say. And I've heard it described that before in science fiction. Like space-time is like one entity, one determinate entity, and I think that's exactly correct logically. Is that that's the first
Where Hegel
real
anticipates
determinate?
Einstein.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah. You know, Einstein had to have sat down with this book at least once.
I don't think so. He read
Come
Hume,
on,
he read Kant, he read Spinoza, of course,
I know what's
and he read
documented.
Ernst Mach, but I don't think he read. I'm pretty sure he did not read Hegel. I've very little Hegel.
May have re-derived it through just similar
A
sense.
similar structure. Yeah. I,
He-
I I just find it questionable. Like maybe it wasn't documented, but he had to have sat down with this book at least once. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. I don't know.
If you talk about the Soviet physicists, that's a little bit different because they at least had read Engels, and some
Yeah.
of them probably, some of them actually went on to read Hegel as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So time as the negative. Oh, you know what? Jim,
Yeah.
read 258, please.
Okay. Time as the negative unity of self-externality is similarly an out and out abstract ideal being. It is that being which, inasmuch as it is not, and inasmuch as it is not, is. It is becoming directly intuited. This means that differences which admittedly are purely momentary, that is, directly self-sublating, are determined as external, that is, as external to themselves.
Thanks. Yeah. And so you notice in this description how time is intuited and it's external and it's experienced as something that is and it is not. I find I find this turn. I'm so used to the logic eschewing words like intuited or external, and where things are external, they're usually passed over really quickly. But here it's quite the reverse. You know, the things that we're looking at are experienced regularly by all life, right? And so, you know, if you delete that experience and look at the object, right? It's it's so ephemeral, but at the same time you can't get away from the fact that it is experienced, you know. And okay, he says, time like space is a pure form of sense or intuition, the non sensuous sensuous. But as in the case of space, the distinction of objectivity and a subjective consciousness confronting it does not apply to time. Time is the same principle as the I equals I of pure self consciousness. But this principle, or the simple notion, still in its uttermost externality and abstraction, as intuited mere becoming, pure being within self as sheer coming out of self. Time is continuous too, like space, for it is the negativity abstractly relating self to self, and in this abstraction there is as yet no real difference. So again, space goes on forever, and you find a point, and you can go past the point. Well, he's saying the same can be applied to abstract time. Time is continuous. Everything, it is said, comes to be and passes away in time. If abstraction is made from everything, namely from what fills time and also from what fills space, then what we have left over is empty time and empty space. These abstractions are posited and represented as if they were for themselves. Note that, as if they were, which they are not. At this level of abstraction, they don't actually define anything, but are rather components of determinate reality, I guess you could say. If you tried to find a universe in which this were true, I mean, you couldn't see, or God, I can't even think of what that would look like. So, but it is not in time that everything comes to be and passes away. Rather, time itself is the becoming, this coming to be and passing away, the actual existent abstraction, chronos, from whom everything is born and by whom its offspring is destroyed. This is getting into Greek mythology a little bit. I love it. Okay. Going down, he says, only the natural, therefore, is subject to time in so far as it is finite. The true, on the other hand, the idea spirit is eternal. So he's setting off the finite from the idea, from spirit, which is itself infinite, and which we talked about in the logic, but he's now looking at it from the side of nature. Let's see. He talks about time being an abstraction of destruction. He talks about duration is the universal of all these nows. Yeah. So we're coming back to the sense certainty words, and here with the word now and duration, we really get into that. The now has a tremendous right. It is nothing as it is nothing as the individual now, for as I pronounce it, this proudly exclusive now dissolves, flows away, and falls into dust. This is almost verbatim, straight out of the phenomenology's sense certainty. Duration is the universal of all these nows. It is the sublatedness of this process of things which do not endure. And that's getting into perception, I think, because perception is based on the universal. Is that right, Kyle?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how all of this stuff, it doesn't just echo, it's dealing with the same thing from different sides, different dimensions, as we mentioned earlier. He says, but all finite things are temporal because sooner or later they are subject to change. Their duration is thus only relative. Let's see here. If either of you three want to jump in and say anything about any of this, please just jump over me if you could.
Trying to get hit on myself again, but
Oh, you're fine. What is best also endures. Yeah, and he talks about the universal, about spirit, about infinite processes that keep going.
I mean, this was like, the finite, spurious, infinite, and real infinite again, where infinite time is, I guess, the view of time, of infinity from within time, while eternity is the view from the outside, the everything's experienced at once, the one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that part. Yeah. I don't think he's going to do it, but I'd really love to convince Alex one day to take up this text, especially in these early sections. I think he really underestimates his ability a little bit, because so far in space and time and even in place, you're not actually talking about anything different from what's in phenomenology or in logic. It's just from the external point of view where these things exist outside of the eye, or outside of that experiences, which is really kind of the same trick we did with the logic, which is to delete the I from the process. Okay. Um, I love this. He gets before we go on, he gets very poetic about spirit and the idea. He says, in the individual as such, it is otherwise, for on one side is it is the genus. The most beautiful life is that in which the universal and its individuality are completely united in a single form. But the individual is then also separated from the universal, and as such, it is only one side of the process and is subject to change. It is in respect of this moment of mortality that it falls into time. Achilles, the flower of Greek life, Alexander the Great, that infinitely powerful individuality, do not survive. Only their deeds, their effects remain, that is, the world which they brought into being. Mediocrity endures and in the end rules the world. I'm thinking of our president right now. Uh, there is also a mediocrity of thought which beats down the contemporary world, extinguishes spiritual vitality, converts it into mere habit, and in this way endures. Its endurance is simply this, that it exists in untruth, does not receive its due, does not honor the notion that truth is not manifest in it as a process. There's a lot there going on. Kyle, if you could 259.
Dimensions of time, past, future, present, future, and past, or the becoming of externality as such, and the resolution of it into the differences of being or as passing over into nothing, of nothing passing over into being. The immediate vanishing of these differences into singularity is the present as now, which as singularity is exclusive of the other moments. And at the same time, completely continuous in them. It is only this vanishing of its being into nothing and of nothing into its being. Just, I'm just thinking it's kind of like it's a, there's this very like brief moment of like a curve. You'd say it's going up to like being, and only at that very top is now. Everything else is not only coming in or leaving. It's not there.
Yeah, exactly. Alex has tried to make the he's tried to make the argument to me that time should come first and then space. But in this passage, I really feel like time in flexing the negativity of space approaches the becoming of the now, approaches the becoming of reality, I guess you could say, when you're touching on the logical necessity of that now. That's at the top of that curve, right? Because when you're at that now, but you haven't defined space yet, where are you? Like you can't even picture it. It would be like starting with nothing and then moving to being, which Hegel talks about in the logic. At the end of the day, logically, you would have to retreat to being first and then go on to its negation.
That's
You know
about
what I mean?
maybe is about to ask. So you end up with the same thing where you got time to space and then space time.
Exactly. It'd be like you were doubling back. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking that route. The phenomenology itself as a ladder basically has you double back through experience before starting to look at things first objectively and then subjectively, right? Because you can't look at what the objective is until you realize that you, as the observer, as the consciousness, and what you're looking at are both part of the same reality. And once you do, then you can look at what's objective, and then you could start looking at what the subjective makes of both of those of that unity. You know what I mean? I'm still thinking it through. It's still kind of uh, throwing me for a loop that the procedure in the phenomenology basically describes the logic's first two books and how in the phenomenology they're seen as separate. We're still in Kant's world where there's a line between being and the I. And once you realize that they're in unity, but also different from each other, then you can look at them scientifically. And that's the first two books. And then you begin to build notions based off of that unity. And for those watching on the YouTube, if you have no idea what that means, just consult the Science of Logic table of contents, the first two books, where he talks about being and essence, which are two parts of the objective logic. So the two parts of the objective logic, what I'm saying is that those two things are functionally the same thing in the phenomenology as consciousness and its object. Okay. If you think of the object as being and of the consciousness as essence, right? Those two exist. Hegel proves in the logic, not in the logic, in the phenomenology, in a unity, since they share the same reality. That's another way of saying that our reality is monistic, right? There's no second reality that's sort of pulling the strings of our reality. It's all one thing, right? And that's what it means to look at things objectively, using that word in Hegel's way of saying it. Sorry if that went on a little too long. I'm also kind of working it out in my head as we go, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so he works this out. He says that the finite present is the now, fixed as being and distinguished as the concrete unity, and hence is the affirmative from what is negative. In nature, where time is a now, being does not reach the existence of the difference of these dimensions. They are of necessity only in subjective imagination. So in remembrance and fear or hope, what he's talking about there is that the past and the future of time as being in nature are space, for space is negated time. Just as sublated space is immediately the point which developed for itself is time. This is a hard sentence to parse, but if you really want to think about it pictorially, just think about how we think about things past. Okay? If you think about where you were 10 years ago, right? That point in time no longer exists, but it exists as space. It definitely exists as space, right? So the space that is now will become a space entangled with time in the past. As far as time goes, it's dissipated, but as far as space goes, it's still it's a space that endured. You know what I mean? Like what's a concrete example? So I live in my house, right? And tomorrow when I wake up, my house will still be here. And so space, you could say, in this sense, just in this real specific sense, has endured. But time that was now won't be there anymore. Something like that. Does that work as a as an example?
Dad, look. Look.
Yeah, the pictorial, yeah. But I
Yeah.
guess the thing is, I think we'll find that that's the fact through place. What is it? It's the space that gets destroyed while it goes through time and that connection. Because like the space of that of then is a different space than now.
Yeah. Absolutely. But at the same time, like the mountain takes a while to beat down with time. And I think that's what he's getting at with this. He says there's no science of time corresponding to the science of space, to geometry. The differences of time have not this indifference of self-externality. The principle of time is only capable of being so expressed when the understanding has paralyzed it and reduced its negativity to the unit. So it's a very cerebral thing. Time exists more in the head as a science, I guess you could say.
you kind of
Where,
have.
whereas we have geometry as a science of space, right?
It's also in the sense, I guess, with like sense certainty, the fact that you have to perceive a continual sense of nows to
Yeah.
even monitor it versus here, which is just straight here.
I keep thinking of what's his name? Tony Stark trying to figure out the time travel um, thing, equation in the last movie, and he figures it out, and it's like this super secret thing that no one but him would get. Like this is what I think of when Hegel says there is no science of time. Like I bet you at this point there is a science of time, but it's probably so high level mathematics, you know. Uh, I don't know. I could be wrong. Anyway, he goes through and he talks about time and how there's a past, there's a future, and then there's a now. And um, let's see. The truly philosophical science of mathematics as theory of magnitude would be the science of measures, but this already presupposes the real particularity of things which were not there yet externally, which is found only in concrete nature. On account of the external nature of magnitude, this would certainly also be the most difficult of all sciences. Dimensions of time complete the determinate content of intuition in that they posit for intuition the notion of time which is becoming in its totality a reality. So here we get to the coming to be and the passing away. And the logical determinations, which are very slight as well, of becoming are exactly that in the logic. Here we go. The middle term is the indifferent unity of both. So now is the indifferent unity of future and past, so that neither the one nor the other is the determinate. The present is only because the past is not. Conversely, the being of the now is determined as not being, and the non being of its being is the future. The present is this negative unity. The non being of the being which is replaced by the now is the past. The being of the non being which is contained in the present is the future. In the positive meaning of time, it can be said that only the present is, that before and after are not. But the concrete present is the result of the past and is pregnant with the future. The true present, therefore, is eternity. So here we're getting into Commander Cisco territory where, he goes and visits the prophets and they say that they only see the true present, which is eternity. There's no differentiation between the past and the future and now. It's just existence itself. But for us, that eternity only exists in thought, is what Hegel is trying to say here. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, Ben, you take it easy. Hope I made some sense. Good to see you joining us. Cool. All right. And he finishes off here. He says mathematics deals with these objects only quantitative, and among them it does not, as we noted, include time itself, but only the unit variously combined and linked. But applied mathematics is, on the whole, not an immanent science simply because it is the application of pure mathematics. So basically, a science of time exists externally, but an immanent internal science of time, at least in Hegel's era, didn't really exist. But I get the feeling he's like brick by brick, building up what would be the foundations of a science of time, which I think is kind of cool. I wonder if any of your books that sort of lean on Hegel might talk about this. I don't know. Um, kind of cool because if you think of the future and the past qualitatively, instead of just quantitatively, which he's talking about here, that would kind of, you know, that would kind of be the place that goes. I don't know. So it's 9 o'clock and we're at place and motion. I think we should stop because then we can just continue next time. Through place and motion doesn't last that long, I don't think.
No.
So why don't for next time we'll go through place and motion and see if we can't get through inert matter to thrust. We might get that far because we've already technically read it, so we can just review it. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
All right, cool, awesome. All right, and we'll keep going. All right, comrades. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you on the DMs, and we can talk more if you like. Have a great night.
All right.